Excellent. All right. Well, welcome everyone to today's fireside chat session. With an interesting title, Make the Unsexy Waste Sexy with System Design. And a Silicon Valley Forum fireside chat with Andy Weinstein. Today's event is produced in partnership with Angel Launch and StarTides. Officially, I am Aaron Rose, the board chair of Silicon Valley Forum. And the two partners, Angel Launch, a little bit about them. They produce venture forums, dinners, and mixers for global startups and tech professionals to meet Silicon Valley accredited investors, angels, VCs, family offices, and corporate investors with a focus on general tech, AI, and health tech. Startups can also pitch investors from a stage in front of accredited investors. This is led by Zahava Stroud and in the Bay Area, and Zahava's angel launch, I believe, has gone for every month for 40 months consecutively. So I've been proud to be attending her events as an investor, and it's a fun event. StarTides, the other hat I wear is I'm the chair of the StarTides Advisory Board, and the mission of StarTides is to share knowledge, to build resilience of industry and communities in the face of global stressors. StarTides is coordinated through the Center for Resilient and Sustainable Communities, also known as CRASC, at George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. And the TIDES component is coordinated through the Department of Defense, Naval Postgraduate School at the Pentagon, and in Monterey, California. What is the Silicon Valley Forum? We are a California-based 501c3 nonprofit organization fostering innovation, entrepreneurship, and leadership in Silicon Valley and throughout the world. We achieve our mission through events, programs, and conferences, and we function as a center of knowledge and connections, covering everything from the latest tech trends to the startup and investment ecosystem. And our activities are aimed to educate, train, inspire, and connect technologists, entrepreneurs, corporates, and investors. We've got a number of events coming up in 2 weeks. We've got the Silicon Valley Funding Summit in Las Vegas, Nevada. That precedes that's the day before CES. Angel Launch is one of the drivers of that, and Silicon Valley Forum is proud to support it. In San Francisco on January 14th is the Global Life Sciences Breakfast that we are partnering with the law firm Nixon Peabody, and this is in conjunction with the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. We do have 2 fireside chats coming up in mid-January. One, Pitch Perfect, with Patricia Liu. Patricia is based in the Bay Area, and her entire business is focused on helping startups with their pitches. And she teaches a seminar at Stanford. She's an angel investor herself. She's got a background, interesting background from the restaurant industry. So she'll be our guest. And then on January 21, building an AI-powered fashion community, fireside chat with Shania Tsai. I actually met Shania years ago in Seattle. There's a Seattle Connection theme today. She lives in New York City and has built an app and a company around AI and fashion. And then on January 25th, there will be an online event called Industrial Africa 2025. And that's a global conversation on Africa's role in driving innovation, sustainability, and industrial growth with IoT, AI, robotics, edge computing, and open source technologies. I believe I am a moderator in a session on that, and there'll be more information. And going back to StarTides, we will be having our 18th annual StarTides Capabilities Demonstration, April 13th through the 15th in Arlington, Virginia. And immediately following that will be the TIDES follow-on event inside the Pentagon Center courtyard in Arlington. The disclaimer to make the lawyers happy. The Silicon Valley Forum, a California public benefit corporation, also known as SVF, does not endorse or sponsor any commercial product, service, or activity. SVF's production of this event does not constitute endorsement by SVF or its representatives. All SVF programs and services are extended to the public on a non-discriminatory basis. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we are funded by grants and donations from people like you. So thank you for your support. With that said, let me get out of the stop sharing and get into the conversation. Andy, I have known Andy for a number of years. I think close to 10, 8, 9, or 10 years. I can't really remember. I think we met probably at some startup event. I seem to meet a lot of people, or maybe we were introduced by someone of a startup event. But I'll let Andy kind of explain on what he does and why he's doing it, and let him explain kind of the pivots and lessons learned. There's been a number of pivots that I've seen in this company. It's been quite fascinating, and I'll let him explain to that. But I guess, Andy, welcome. And kind of the first question I like to pose is, what's the problem are you solving? Explaining it like you're explaining it to a 5-year-old. What is the problem you're solving? Who is experiencing this problem? And then go into the product itself. So let's let that be the opening pitch, please.
Yeah, so I think the first I solve multiple problems and I just address problems from different people, right? From our feedstock providers who are producing the waste, they are producing so much waste that they don't know what to do with it. And so therefore they need somebody to say, "Hey, let me grab all this and find a way to extract value." The other side of the equation is how many people are kind of what how do we get a distributed network of hydrogen in the United States? How do we get a distributed network of commodities? And then how do we build kind of the shovels for AI all into one? And that's kind of the other problem we're solving is carbon credits, hydrogen production, and food grade CO2 and carbon ash for EV batteries. So we have like a lot of problems that we're solving with a single solution based off of this giant waste pile that has basically a negative value at first, and then we convert it to all positive value by identifying other problems that we can solve with that waste pile.
So, and the customer, your target customer is who? Is it utilities? Is it, power generators? I mean, who's the target customer?
So our target customer right up front is actually going to be who we sell the output to. So for hydrogen, it'd be a way to dispense it, whether it's a gas station or a large corporate that is looking to buy hydrogen and run on that. The other piece is the fangs that are building all these data centers. They need carbon credits, especially in states and countries that have cap and trade. So California, Washington, they have cap and trade. They need carbon credits to turn on those data centers. The other piece is for EV battery making, you need carbon ash to make the graphite. So therefore, an inherent byproduct of our process is this carbon ash. So EV batteries, we can give them the, say, materials for graphite production.
And the product that you say the word waste. And I know kind of the description we use, you talk about dry and liquid waste. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I started this process by looking at like plastics and trying to recycle plastics because my background is a third generation Pepsi bottler. So like I've always kind of looked at the industry's externalities as something that I should address because whether I deal with it today or tomorrow, it's going to be on my plate. And so I started with looking at essentially dry waste, which was these plastics. And then I found that the technology that's used to recycle plastic is just not that great and it's too input sensitive. So then I moved to something that's less input sensitive and it allows me to handle dry and wet waste. and be able to extract as much value as possible and not be so dependent on a very specific waste stream like low density polyethylene. So I could be much more kind of less input sensitive and have a lot more system design on what my outputs are based off of what are the local demand in that general geography.
Yeah, you mentioned carbon credits, and carbon credits is somewhat it's got a slant to it in the political realm, and so I'd like to get have you explain what are carbon credits for those that are unfamiliar, and then part of the question is how does carbon credits change? How will the market change based on either who is occupying the White House? We have a new administration coming in that's got their own different view of carbon credits. Will it change? And also, countries outside the United States have launched their own initiatives in carbon credits with various areas of success. Canada at one point was a leader in carbon credits, and they've had to pull back. Australia also was very active in it, and they've changed based on administration. So, what is carbon credits for the uninitiated, and then how does the landscape change politically, and how does that affect your operation?
Yeah, so carbon credits are very simply a way to value your carbon production, whether it's through waste or whatever you're doing. You're creating carbon, and you are trying to remove carbon from the atmosphere, right? So what you're doing is basically those who are producing carbon versus those who are capturing carbon, and creating a valuation to essentially market match those producers with those users. Um, and it has tax effects. So essentially, it reduces your taxable income, but it also has other aspects associated with cap and trade. Is you need to uh, buy carbon credits to reduce your carbon load in that given state. And so for us, we just see data centers being having huge electrical needs, and those electrical needs are therefore producing a large amount of greenhouse gas emissions. So for them, what we need to do is give them carbon credits so that they are essentially lowering their carbon emissions through buying the removal of carbon from other sectors like what we're doing. Um, so do I see legislation changing for carbon credits? Yes. Do I see the world responding kind of to counter that? Absolutely. So in areas where, Australia or Canada reduced their carbon credits, the Nordic countries increased theirs. So all of a sudden, now you have a lot of carbon capture and technology coming out of the Nordic countries that other countries kind of let's say, slowed the roll. And now there's a leadership missing from Australia and Canada in that space, where we're seeing Nordic countries taking the lead. So I think part of it is it's finding an economic value to our emissions, and then being able to then drive innovation across different sectors that might not be directly linked. So that's where carbon credits kind of, I don't know how to explain it. I don't want to say crypto in a way, but there's a representative value that you can share across different industries with a carbon credit that you couldn't do in other situations.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. So let's talk about you. You're living in Seattle. You're based in Seattle,
Mhm.
and you mentioned your family, but yeah, where did you grow up? Where were you born? Where did you go up? And what kind of family background do you have that kind of instilled that where you're headed professionally?
Yeah, so I'm the caboose of four. I'm the youngest child. I grew up in Oakland, California for the first 12 years of my life, and then I moved to Seattle for or Mercer Island, so a wealthy suburb of Seattle when I was 12. Um, I grew up in a French American school, and spent many of my summers in France. So I've always been exposed to a lot of different cultures. And we also jokingly called my house that I grew up in the refugee house because so many people came in and out of it. And so, in a weird way, it enabled me to start to look at the world in a kind of a different lens than most people because I didn't see things so clearly as black and white, but more as nuanced and different cultures. And, when somebody says, oh, this is a cultural thing, it's not bad or good, it's different, right? Most cultures develop because of some triggering event way in the past that none of us have relevance to today. And so being able to grow up in an environment where you're seeing all these people coming in and out of your house, and then also being the youngest where you're trying to vie for attention, just made me kind of much more open to talk to people and hear their story. And that's also allowed me to be very able to learn. And like one of the things that I like to preach to employees, teammates, advisors is we're all on a learning journey. And there's no way that individually any one person can know the complete array of facts necessary to make a decision. So if you're in that environment, you need to be able to receive information, listen to it, process it, and change direction with new information. And so that's been really helpful for me to pivot because what I was doing before when we first started talking is I was trying to build a distribution network that essentially put toilet paper on Pepsi trucks and then track the movement of those goods um, using an array of sensors. So we wanted to create an AI ops platform that allowed us to essentially document all the changes that were happening within a warehouse, the delivery system, and order system, and do that automatically. Well, nowadays, I'm using that same concept, but we're generating carbon credits as we're moving waste streams into value. So it's the ability to pivot and learn when it's like, oh, I have the wrong hypothesis. Let me change has really been a big driver. It's because of this environment of growing up in the refugee house and kind of amongst an international environment.
Now, you went to school where?
I went to Johns Hopkins
You went to in Baltimore.
in Baltimore. Yeah, I went
Uh,
undergrad in Johns Hopkins, and then in college I went to, or sorry, in grad school I got my MBA at Fordham. But I also spent time in undergrad in Argentina, where I went to Universidad de Buenos Aires. So I had also experience abroad. I was in high school. I did my half of my junior year in Argentina as well. So I have a lot of kind of international experience, living solo in a different country and in a different language.
So how does one go from Mercer Island to Johns Hopkins? I mean, Johns Hopkins is an excellent school, but it's not on a lot of people's list of schools of from the Pacific Northwest. And so what drew you there, and then ultimately to the Fordham, which is a Jesuit school
Mhm.
in New York City, and I believe in the Bronx. So what was the attraction of going to Maryland and then up to New York?
So for going to Hopkins, I was deciding between architecture school and political science. And there is something about being close to DC and kind of the exposure of that political scene that made me want to do that. And having come back from Argentina in 2001, where I witnessed the economic collapse, I kind of, I don't know if the right word is guilt, but I had some internal burning to be in political science and trying to address those problems. So I ended up graduating with a degree in Latin American studies. And then I realized that once I understood people's culture, I could sell them products. And so that's where I went down and worked for Cadbury Chocolates and was first in marketing before, or first in sales before jumping into marketing, basically because I knew the culture down in Argentina. Um, for business school, what got me to Fordham was the 2008 financial crisis. So I was working for Cadbury in Argentina. I had two job offers in the US that I was coming back to explore. And they were both so significant that it made sense for me to kind of let my visa lapse and just head home. But that was April 2008. So then I applied to business schools, and Fordham said yes. And so I headed to New York. And the campus of Fordham for the business school is actually in Columbus Circle in Manhattan. So I actually have never been to the Fordham campus in the Bronx.
Okay, that's good. Good to know. I didn't realize it's over in Columbus Circle. Yeah,
Yeah.
in Manhattan. Um, so you've been all right. So going to the question of being an entrepreneur, what led you to launch this company, and particularly, you talked about what it was when the iteration when you first launched it, but what made you think I'm going to incorporate this business? What was it to jump into being an entrepreneur?
So I've always been very entrepreneurial in random things. So like I've always tried to figure out how do I turn this into a business. That's just naturally tinkering, growing up as kind of the third generation of a Pepsi family. And before then, even my great grandfather was entrepreneurial when they moved to Montana to to sell goods along the kind of the gold rush. Um, I just kind of grew up in an environment that always was there's that burn, there's that fire within. And then when I got back into my family business in 2013, I walked into the warehouse and realized that we had floor to ceiling chemicals, and those floor to ceiling chemicals did not really make a dent into our revenue streams. And so I was wondering, how do we marry this? And I realized the problem was our supply chain, our go-to-market strategy, and all of the things of actually how to execute were broken. But the general idea of adding more products to our routes was made sense. So I kind of blew up the supply chain, rebuilt it, and then put together a very coherent marketing strategy of we're going to target bathrooms because everywhere you drink beverage, you got to go pee. It's as simple as that. And and so from there, it took us about a year and a half to just dominate the area and really expand. Um, and in about 3 years, we were so dominant in our territory, I realized I got to take this opportunity to other beverage distributors that I know. And so we had some of the other Pepsi, Dr. Pepper, and Coors bottlers come and visit us in Wenatchee to see what I was doing because while everybody's volumes were going down, we were going up. And from there, that really kind of got everybody interested. And I realized, okay, let me just branch off on my own and really help launch this essentially new distribution network that already has existing trucks, existing salespeople, existing warehouses, existing service techs, and just repurposing a lot of these existing skills and infrastructure to sell more products and make every drop more profitable.
So as you're building your company, right, on average, 8 out of 10 uh, startups fail, and there's various levels of failure. There's complete dissolutions. There's failures of underperformance, but the company's still in business. Um, but what are some? But business failure is about risk. And so my question is that the early days, when what risk were you encountering? What underperformances were you encountering that made you pivot to go and when you're at the and how do you decide when you're at the fork of the road with your business strategy to go left and right? What KPIs, what criteria do you use to make those decisions and ultimate pivots in your strategy?
Yeah, well, so I think the first pivot that kind of forced me to kind of reposition everything was COVID, right? I was launching a new distribution center every 3 weeks. So I was going out and being present, helping people, teaching people how to sell toilet paper and trash bags on Pepsi trucks, right? Like that required in-person, hand-to-hand communication, going out and selling people and making them realize selling this other product was not that hard. Because a lot of people, there's a hesitancy of doing anything new. And so you really had to kind of break that barrier. Um, COVID hit, I could not travel. I had to start to focus on other kind of skill sets and knowledge sets that I had and bring it into value. One of the things I knew was where all these gloves were coming from. I had relationships with the manufacturers. So pivoting to PPE enabled me to see, oh, this is what I know. This is how I can deliver it. Where I started to learn the next step for the, let's say, next pivot was once I realized what was breaking in the supply chain, I decided to put together that information and say, what is the data set necessary to automate a global supply chain? And I started to realize we're just not collecting enough data for that to happen. And so that really helped kind of set me on pace for the big pivot, which came after I made a presentation on what is the data set necessary to automate the global supply chain. I had an oil exec who came up to me at breakfast and asked if he could sit down. I said, sure, but I'm going to make fun of you first. Why don't you recycle plastic? Pepsi and Coke can't buy enough of it. And from there, I really started to learn that it was a feedstock problem and they just couldn't collect it cheaply enough to extract as enough value. And I just was like, oh, I'm delivering stretch film and garbage bags, which is the plastic that you need to do, that you need to recycle. I'm just going to use that as like I have a Pepsi truck that's dropping that off. I know where it's located and I can pick it up because every route starts full and ends empty. So I kind of knew there was an existing latency and I drew a solution on a napkin and the oil exec Jason was like, "Yeah, that might work." So that kind of put me into stealth mode because I was already looking at some horizons of selling PPE and getting other bottlers on board just because of, let's say, market dynamics associated with COVID. So that feeling was already there. I put together a presentation, presented it to a friend, and he was like, holy cow, this is something really impressive. Let me get you in front of the industry. And then once I went down to Houston and presented in front of the oil and gas industry and their stakeholders, ranging from NASA to DFW, Microsoft, Aramco, whatnot, I realized that I was onto something much bigger than this little diversification model that I had was working on before. And so at that point, I just decided, okay, I'm going to let go of my customers and I'm going to focus 100% on this waste to energy. Um, and it was difficult. I would say that pivot required a lot more introspection than anything else. Um, and you kind of have to admit, okay, this is not a failure, it's just not a success, right? And there's a difference, right? um and so that's where I really did the big pivot. And then once you start seeing all the data regarding recycling, energy balance, all that, you realize that the system in place is needs to be altered, and there are very easy low-hanging fruits that were like right before me that I didn't even know. Like that a fruit packing facility would have so much waste that just their waste alone, I can extract so much value.
Now, going back to your background, and when we wrote up the description for this fireside chat, we're using very technical terms, and things that I had to really go into that even I was unfamiliar with some of the technical terms and the scientific terms. How how much of a learning process did you need to do to really like hydrochar, right? I had heard of it. I didn't know what it was. I had to, Google it and see exactly what is that. But you are in a very scientific field. You're dealing with hydrogen production, your facility, water, soil pollution remediation. How did you learn the science in your business?
Yeah, I think I entered a space that I had no background in, right? And so being totally honest with myself and saying, hey, I need to find specialists and people who have expertise in this field. Let me reach out to my network. And I always would either find somebody directly in my network or somebody who I could just reach out blindly and be like, hey, I don't know anything about this space. Can you give me an assistance? And that's really been it, is being super open to being the dumbest person in the room every time, and being able to absorb that information uh, has been really helpful. And then you can also put together pieces that other people might not see as pieces. And that's where it's been really fun, is because when I was first presented hydrochar, everybody was talking about soil remediation and fertilizer and stuff like that. And it was not very exciting for me, to be frank. Like I was like, oh, so we produce this byproduct that people might pay a premium for? Not exciting. But then I realized that hydrochar is just another way of saying carbonized thing, right? Carbonized thing by hot water, right? Okay, well, that is coal. The difference is coal takes 22 million years, hydrochar takes half an hour to an hour. It, okay, now can I backfill, put this product of hydrochar in a coal thing? Oh yeah, okay. So now I'm going into a technology that's well established, well researched. There's a supply chain, there's talent, there's permits. That's a lot easier path. And so for me, it was really just figuring out what's my easiest path forward and combining pieces that others were trying to keep completely separated. And that was the waste to hydrochar and then hydrochar to a coal ecosystem where I'm using existing technology and making it easier. It's like you just put the pieces together, but you have to start by being the dumbest person in the room and every room.
I can appreciate that. A piece of advice I was given long ago, early in my career, was surround yourself with people smarter than you. And I remember when I started giving lectures about entrepreneurship, and I had my own startup, ROI3, and I had a pie chart, and the slide, the top of the slide was surround yourself with people smarter than you, and it takes a team. And of the pie chart, I anointed 2% of the knowledge. To me and my colleagues, laughed and said, "Well, I was being very boisterous of knowing 2% of the knowledge of the team." And so there's truth to that. Let's go more to the business side of things. How did you come up with the name? What does the name mean? And what's the value of that into your sales and marketing strategy?
Yeah, so there's a play called Waiting for Godot. And in that play, there are two people who are essentially bantering to each other, waiting for somebody else to solve their problems. And what I thought was really funny is that if they worked together, they could solve their problems. And so they were waiting for Godot to arrive and their problems would come away. And so I thought of, hey, how do we apply Godot as this is the solution that people have been waiting for? I just didn't realize when I started this process at Bottler with what I called Bottler Distribution Group, which is the boring, unsexy name out there. And I was like, okay, I got to pivot to something more with more oomph. And so I originally pivoted to good organization of delivery and operating technology, and that was Godot. And then that would apply for the energy side as well, because now we're the climate change solution that people have been waiting for. So that's kind of the origination is I like to play. I think it the messaging is that we have to work together and we have to essentially not wait for somebody else to deliver the solution that we're waiting for.
Wonderful. For the people in our audience, I just enabled microphones and cameras. We've got about 24 minutes left, and so definitely welcome anyone who have questions to unmute yourself. I think you should be able to unmute yourself and pose the question. But kind of moving on, so you're in a very specialized sector. So how are you going to get customers? How do you find your customers, identify them, reach out to them? What's the role? Yeah, tell us more about specifically your sales strategy.
Yeah, so my first customer is essentially the feedstock provider, right? So they're the ones who have these large waste streams. And what I found was if you have a large waste stream, you're willing to find anybody to get rid of it with. Like the current solutions out there of essentially Waste Management or Republic or whoever your daily trash collector is just so underwhelming and is a true cost to the system. So from that standpoint, going in and saying, "Hey, I'm going to rent space on your land to process your waste into something of value immediately," is very appealing. So I went across the street, found an apple packer, and they were like, "Yep, that here it is. Help us." So that was super easy. The hard part is really getting off takers for hydrogen because there is it's a growing market, but it's not grown. There is not the infrastructure that needs to be built for people to buy vehicles that run on hydrogen. So it is a little bit market making. And for me, I don't mind being the market maker. So I can do some of those pieces, but part of it is identifying where is a gas station that's willing to buy the hydrogen to be my output, or where is a sustainable aviation fuel that needs the hydrogen for that. So we're finding those pieces, and it just ends up being kind of a network of people in this environment, like the people that need the hydrogen for sustainable aviation fuel are also the people in these climate tech and deep tech circles that I'm circulating, kind of involved with now. um, so you just find them that most of the times they're like, "Find me, I got this flag up," and so we can find them. And then the other piece is like food grade CO2. Again, I'm a third generation Pepsi bottler, so I can see, oh, I buy a ton of food grade CO2 and I sell food grade CO2. So as an output, I can be my own buyer of those goods. And so that's been also very helpful, is I kind of reduce the risk by wearing two hats where I can buy the output of one.
I note my next question, I want to go deeper into hydrogen. And I note that Professor Dr. Lance Sherry is on here from George Mason University, and he's doing stuff dealing with plane contrails. And so, because it's about hydrogen and the application of it. And I attended TechCrunch Disrupt in San Francisco a couple of months ago, and there was a company there that basically redesigned the plane engine on hydrogen. There's been a number of companies I know in Washington State as well as in California using hydrogen in aviation. Um, Miles O'Brien, which is a reporter for PBS NewsHour on aviation, he's done a various report. It's something that's very interesting. Um, and then the other part, kind of my statement here, is that I was asked to look into creating a hydrogen uh, clearinghouse commodity trading board in Europe, in Slovenia to be specific. But the reality is that hydrogen is still more in the R&D early stages, and it's not real clear that the use of hydrogen is going to really scale either in transportation, hydrogen cars, airplanes, or even within a fuel for electricity. And so that's, an observation, but it's a question to you. Are you seeing something similar? How much, if you are, how much has to change? Those trends have to change in order for your company to be successful.
Yeah, so I think the general notion today is that hydrogen is going to be the future. We're just not there yet. The reason why a lot of the hydrogen is super expensive today is essentially the liquefaction and the deliquification process. Is it just adds a lot of cost. It requires a lot of energy. You got to get temperatures down quite a bit. Um, and you have to slowly deliquify it so that it doesn't explode. So there's serious risk involved with the smallest molecule out there that will also leak from the contain uh, different forms of containment. Where we see the bigger issue is actually on energy density. Is if you have a truck of compressed hydrogen, that's pretty easy to control. Liquefied hydrogen is a lot more difficult and it increases the cost exponentially, but you have the energy density necessary to kind of move large amounts across large distances. So I think a lot of it is there's essentially balancing act. How do we do production in this environment where we don't need to do all of the really expensive liquefaction piece and getting all and essentially bringing on more risk in the process? What we're doing is we're saying, hey, we're going to produce hydrogen not in large amounts, but actually small and medium amounts so that we can dispense it locally. And then I can bring in the infrastructure and the network to use that hydrogen. And so that allows us to start in a compressed environment. And it just is going to significantly reduce the overall costs. So there's a lot of it's growing. It's going to be the solution because at the end of the day, like when you move heavy goods, you need to have lighter trucks, and electric trucks are like semis are too heavy. You're spending too much battery space. And in beverage, we don't cube out, we wait out. So having that understanding of I gotta focus on making sure the battery is not replacing sellable product is the same thing kind of like I go to liquefaction so that the weight of my truck is more valuable and the cost of that route is more valuable. So you have these different balancing pieces. I do think there is a lot of R&D that needs to be done. Um, but I think that you're seeing more management risk that's associated. A lot of people who have a budget and they're looking at 5 projects, and the one that is going to have the most hairs attached are things like hydrogen and nuclear and stuff like that. And so those are the things that are easier to cut off a list of projects because everything else is so standard. Um, and I think that's what gives us a huge opportunity because I'm not really competing against the big guys. I'm able to kind of navigate this little in between zone. Um, so, long story short, hydrogen is about energy density, the problems associated with the small molecule, and the way that organizations manage big projects that involve things like hydrogen.
Appreciate that explanation. Let's go back to the team. You're the founder, CEO of GODOT. Who's around the table with you? How big is your company, your advisors, your board? And where do you see? So who do you have at the table now? I know you're trying to raise capital. If you want to talk a little bit about that as well, some of the trials and tribulations of getting in front of investors, and then what is your crystal ball? What are some of your goals in 2025 and in 2026?
Okay, I'm gonna break that down to let's first focus on the team and then we'll go to the next steps. So the team is we have a board that have kind of a lot of experience in either IoT. So Alex kind of runs from SAP, spent a lot of time in IoT and machine to machine learning. So when we were talking about tracking goods through a system, it was using a lot of his expertise and relying on his expertise. The other members of our board include Craig Russell, who is EVP of coffee at Starbucks and understands supply chain and the complexity of jurisdiction, compliance, etc. And then we just recently added Rakesh Srinivasan, who used to be the global head of engineering at Nestle. So he's kind of his big focus has been in the built environment because he's kind of led a lot of the manufacturing. So our team really kind of identifies a lot of the, let's say, the supply chains that we want to address on a board level. From the senior advisors, I went out and got the people that have the expertise at the scale that I want. In many cases, I just reach out blindly. So like Paul Stith is a senior advisor who used to be area vice president of green transportation at Black and Veatch, which is an engineering, procurement, and construction company that has done, I believe, the most hydrogen fueling projects in the United States and the second most charging. They have great expertise in that field, and he kind of managed those projects. And so having somebody like him that I can bounce ideas off is great. And also it allows me to say, okay, I'm dumb enough to say, okay, my idea was not great, so let's follow yours. I also brought in people like Urshad Vasarely, who was a GM of finance at Chevron. Again, I needed energy folks because my background being beverage and food and janitorial is completely different. And so from that standpoint, it really requires you to put a team around you of all the experts that are super knowledgeable in these niches that are important components of the total solution that we're trying to bring to our customers. And so I just brought in a huge network. So we have about 30 senior advisors, and I talk with them on a pretty regular basis. And then we also have senior advisors who are kind of preparing to be full-time employees, from project management to construction expertise, um, because those are all important components that at the end of the day are going to reduce our risk of execution. Because that's really where I see the biggest hurdle being is how do we execute this big vision? And do we have the right people to give me feedback and tell me no when I need to be told no?
Okay. So going into the new year, what's you know you got the holidays, January 1 coming around, and what does the next 12 months look like for you and your business?
Yeah, for the next 12 months is essentially close the round. So we're raising 20 million. And we have a post-money valuation of 100 million, with a lead investor. So the first job is close that round, hire the bodies, start the process, and start permitting. Then we start the construction. It will take us, let's say everything goes perfectly planned, and within 2 weeks of the new year, the round is closed. Then we start all of the hard work that's necessary for the built environment: permitting, getting modeling, engineering, all of those aspects. At the same time, in parallel, we'll get a lot of the offtake agreements finalized, LOIs finalized, and really, it's the non-fun back office stuff that is for me it's exciting, and but for most people it's not. We just There's some methodical approach to it. We have a warehouse that right now is already storing large amounts of apple and pear waste for us to process. So we want to get a machine in there as quickly as possible to start turning that into value. So in the next 12 months is really going to be kind of a sprint to get a temporary machine processing the existing waste, and then get the building plans in place and hopefully break ground for the 4 units that we want inside that warehouse to start with 55 tons of waste a day and go up to 120 tons a day of waste capacity.
So in 5 years' time, what's the grand vision for your company and for you within that company?
So in 5 years' time, we hope to have 3 sites fully built and operating, and kind of producing revenue of selling hydrogen, food grade CO2, carbon ash, and carbon credits. Um, but I would say if we take a longer horizon, about 10-year time, what I want to do is create a distributed network across the United States that's producing small and medium amounts of hydrogen for local dispensing, and basically create that market for hydrogen vehicles. Because I realize if we're going to start moving heavy materials, we need hydrogen, not electric.
Okay. Um, what are some more lessons learned as far as mistakes you've made in the path during the path of creating your business?
There is a difference between entrenched thinking and knowledge. Um, And I think a lot of people they use a lot of this entrenched thinking to validate their perspective, but they might not actually know why that is why it's present. Um, I one of the things that I see often is like the keep it simple stupid, right? Everybody says KISS, and then you're like, well, if I'm solving a complex problem, I actually need a complex result solution. And trying to solve complexity with simplicity is actually not beneficial. And so a lot of the times from what I've heard is from people within the industries where they have expertise, is they get so frustrated that entrenched thinking is blocking progress and blocking innovation. And that's where I've seen the biggest battle is trying to pick out what is entrenched thinking versus what is knowledge. And that's the big piece.
So if people want to learn more about Godot, should they go? I did post your link for on LinkedIn, and people are always welcome to connect with me. But to learn more about your business, do you have a website up? Are you still keeping this under stealth? Where are you at in kind of promoting it?
Yeah, so we are emerging from stealth mode. Our website is not up yet. So right now, kind of find me on LinkedIn. That seems to be the general location of most of my activities. But to the new year, we will have a landing page and a lot more, let's say, public announcements, and I'll be on the road having more conversations and stuff like that. So um, it's just we're in that early ramp up stage.
Early ramp up stage. I like that. What has been, I mean, let's talk a little bit more about that. You've gone from kind of just your own show and now you're managing. Uh, how does that change? How does that change on how you approach, going from idea to product to revenue generation? How's your day-to-day life changed? And how has your perspective changed as you go from one phase to another?
So I think one of the things when you start and uh, do a startup, you put all the responsibility on your shoulders, right? And so therefore you have this natural urge to basically try to have an answer for everything. And over time, you realize there's no way for that. And so one of the biggest things that I've learned in managing is really trying to let go of the reins in many cases, and then putting together teams of people to solve things that you push out versus individuals. So you're not putting all of that weight onto a single person. And you allow that like these teams of people to work together to try to solve the solution before it comes back to you. Because a lot of the times when I first started out, I would have one, it was me. I would send it to one person. They would take a crack at it and send it back to me. And in many cases, be in the exact same state that I had just sent it to them. And I'm like, this is not helping me progress. And so when I put together multiple teams, they're able to ask each other before it gets back to me. So then that's using my time more efficiently. And in a weird way, it allows them to both learn kind of the process behind it as well as what is going into the different decision making. And then when they come back to me, I also get an understanding of what went into that decision making. Um, and so I think that's been the biggest thing is kind of making sure I can push multiple people to solve the same problem together versus trying to have one person solve this, one person solve that, one person solve that. Because what ends up happening is it all comes back to you in the exact same state you just sent it out.
So I'm going to ask the last question here, which probably could be a topic of its own, but AI is everywhere, right? You can't go, 2 seconds without something mentioning about AI. But we haven't talked about AI, and you don't have it in your LinkedIn about AI. But in 3 minutes or less, how does AI affect your business, whether automation, the workforce, how you source, what does AI mean to Godot?
Yeah, so internally, we're going to use AI in a multitude of ways, not just generative AI, but using natural language processing to organize employees by skill sets, knowledge sets, and location. So, what we want to do is to have a very dynamic model that allows kind of every participant to be one to one. So, if you need to find the right person, you don't need to go through a hierarchy of pain. You can go right to the person with that specific knowledge set. So, we're going to be using AI in a way of organizing our backend. On the other side, from a demand side, we see AI leading the data center needs of carbon credits. So output for carbon credits is going to, that's what's essentially bringing up the demand function. And then with batteries and kind of, let's say, resource allocation, I see AI being a much better solve for a lot of those other pieces. And so I think using AI to identify where we're producing hydrogen, where we're going to sell it, is going to be something down the line, just because we know if we're producing 80 in 80 locations across the United States, the question is where does 81 be? We can use AI to identify the holes in the market. So I see there's a lot of opportunity in AI that way as well. But I also look at AI as a tool, not necessarily a be all end all. So when I see a lot of companies that are not really AI companies, they're just, let's say, a software platform on top of an AI model. I'm like, okay, that has certain amount of legs, but it's gonna have a wall. For me, we don't want to be an AI company. We want to be a company that delivers value.
It's very, very well said. That's a great concluding remark. So, thank you, Andy. This has been informative, educational. It's been and enlightening, and I think I really appreciate your candor in talking about some of the challenges you've encountered and how you're leveraging some of those challenges and learning experiences as you build Godot and hopefully a successful and ultimately profitable company. So thank you all. Thank you everyone for joining us. We got the holiday season. I'll wish everyone a happy Hanukkah, happy or Merry Christmas, Feliz Navidad. I think we've got one person up in Canada in the Vancouver area. Happy Boxing Day, happy Kwanzaa, and be safe if you are traveling. And thanks again, Andy. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great.
Boxing Day is the Canadian one. That's what we get.
That's that's all you're entitled to. Go lobby Ottawa for more.
All right, good meeting. Nice to hear from you, Andy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See ya.